So are the commandments of Christ like any other law in this world? Any other law that men have? Are they the same or are they different? When a man follows the speed limit is the law of the land, and it's good for him to do it. But so often speed limits are arbitrary. Why is it 55 and not 50? Or 45 and not 50? Or 35 but not 30? There are some roads where they have mathematically calculated the safe speed that you can drive. Engineers have done that. That's different. But so oftentimes in this world, laws are somewhat arbitrary, and laws are merely the manifestations of power and authority. Laws are also punitive. Don't do this, or this is what will happen. If you do this, you'll be fined. If you do this, you'll be put in prison. If you do this, you might be shot, right? There are certain laws, and they are punitive, and they are restrictive, and they are prohibitive. But the commandments of Christ and the law of Christ that he gives to us is so much different than this, because the law of Christ is proactive. So, if I follow the speed limit, I might be a safe driver. But does it change who I am? No. Does it change my internal reality? No. What would happen if you kept the commandments of Christ diligently every moment of every day? Think about that intensely. What would happen to you if you actually kept the commandments of Christ, if you actually labored with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all your mind to keep the commandments of Christ? What would happen to you? What would happen to me? We would be different people. We would become something different. We wouldn't lose our humanity. We would not exceed our baptism. We can't exceed it. We can only attempt to fulfill it, and we always fall short. But what would happen to us? We would become like Christ. We would become just like him as far as that's possible to sinners, to mere creations. What happens to the man who does the opposite, who says, I will go as far as possible from the commandments of Christ. I will break all the commandments. I will rebel against them. I will not keep them. What is he like? What does he become like? Just like Satan. Just like Satan, a mere image of this awful monster. And I don't need to tell you any examples, because you already know all this. If you study the world, you've seen plenty of monsters, you've seen plenty of evil men, and you know how evil men can get, and actually most of us don't know how evil men can get. But that's the truth. And so we have to be careful to say, is the law of God like the law of the land? Is the law of the God merely legal? No, it's existential, it's real. The law of Christ is a lot more like going to the doctor and hearing him say to you, look, you're very sick, you have a serious wound, and there's a series of steps we need to engage in to close the wound. We have to first put antiseptic on it, then we might have to put antibiotics on it, maybe. Then we have to close it shut, because it's a very wide wound. Right? This is not arbitrary, this is real. Why? Based on experience. So the work of God has a purpose. It's not merely to obey God. It's okay, I obey him. But rather, there's a purpose behind it. What is that purpose? What is the judgment? Before I answer the question, I'll say, what is the judgment? We can talk about the judgment in many, many ways. But one of the greatest ways we can speak about the judgment is that the judgment is when we, who are temporal, meet eternity. The judgment is the moment we come into eternity. Some of the saints have seen God, and in seeing God, they see eternity from afar, or they catch a glimpse of it. But the dreadful day of judgment is the day in which our temporal reality that we understand is immersed in eternity. It's immersed in it. There's no going back now. We're in eternity once the judgment starts. And no longer is there any more temporalness at all. The rules that this system works by is gone. It doesn't work this way anymore. That's why there's no more repentance, there's no more changes, there's only trajectories. Either a man is on a trajectory towards God or he's on a trajectory away from him. But there's no more alterations of this anymore. And so the commandments of Christ exist to do what? To prepare man for eternity. Why? Because to abide in eternity with God means you have to be in harmony with him. You have to become harmonized with him. So if you want to be in harmony with him, you must become like him. And that's why Christ is the judge. Because it's his life, it's his law that we follow. He's the one who created us, the one who died to redeem us, the one who offered himself up for us, the one who ascended into heaven. He has been given all power to judge. But what is the judgment? The judgment will be him. What I mean by this is that different fathers say different things about the judgment, but St. Simeon the New Theologian says this. He says, our judgment will be simply seeing Christ. You will see Christ. And once you see him, you will step to the left or you'll step to the right. Because you'll immediately know whether you are of him or whether you are not of him. You will immediately know. Because you have either lived as he has lived or you will have not done so. And so the judgment is not so much an act of God's retributive justice, for him to say, okay, these are the penalties that I have planned. But rather it is This is the final moment in which man will be verified before eternity begins. This is the beginning of eternity. And man's reality is set in this moment. You hear so much in what the deacon has just read to you from the Gospel of Matthew about the commandments, about works, about deeds. Why is this? Why is this? In the pericope of the judgment, we hear nothing more about faith anymore. Why is that? Faith is important. Without faith, we cannot be saved. No one can be. We cannot even draw near to God without faith. Faith is so critical. And St. Paul says we must also have hope, and we must also have love. Faith, hope, and love. And yet I'll ask you a question. Is faith eternal? No, it's not. Faith is only of this world. Why? Because in the next world, faith will be replaced with knowledge. Knowledge supersedes faith. In this world, we don't have knowledge of God. We have faith in Him. We believe on Him because we do not yet have knowledge. In the next life, we will have knowledge of Him. Is there hope in the next world? No. Why would there be? For those who are in hell, there is no hope ever again. They have no hope. They are damned. There is no hope for them. For all eternity, they have no hope. What about those in heaven? Do they have hope? No. Why would they? Because hope is our desire for what we seek. But what will we say when we actually have what we want? Right? If my greatest desire is to hold my daughter again after a long journey, will I hope while I'm holding her? No. That's realized. I've realized my hope. Now I have the joy of holding my daughter now that I have seen her again. So in heaven there is no hope. Because the hope has been realized for those who have met God. What they hoped for has now come. And now they have the joy of their hope. What about love? Love is eternal. Love continues. That's why Christ, in the discussion today about His judgment, speaks of the works of love. Because love continues. The love that we establish in God continues. The love we have for our neighbor will continue. And so, if you study closely what Christ is saying, He's saying, you didn't feed me, you didn't clothe me, you didn't visit me in prison, you did not do these things. What He's saying is you did not love, you did not love, you did not love. So how can you then be in paradise where you will be in harmony with all these people with whom you are unharmonious now? You have no love. How can you be here now? You do not love me. See, when a man keeps the commandments of Christ, he becomes like Christ. But this is the greatest sign of love for Christ. Right? Because we love Him. We do as He says. That's why Christ says, if ye love me, keep my commandments. Why? If ye love me, become like me. Do as I wish. And you will become like me. It's not arbitrary. It's not a power play. It's existential. It's real. It's real. That's what it means. The work of God is to prepare us for eternity. And this eternity is coming. Once it comes, we cannot change anymore. And so men, so oftentimes when they see the law of God, they think this is like the human law. Does God care whether I do this or not? Does God care if I break the fast? Does God care if I have this thought every once in a while? But it's not like that. It's not that God is sitting there with a tally to say, I will tally these times. God certainly knows the times. But I'm going to tally these things now. I'm going to punish you in accordance with His prearranged judgment. No, rather, we are what we do. This is what even the pagan Aristotle said. We are what we do. Why? What is a brave man? A man who does brave things all the time. Not once, but many times. The good man is one who does good things all the time. All the time. The problem is that a man cannot say, well, I'll work in the soup kitchen a couple times, I'll earn my credit, and I'll get into paradise. Rather, he works in the soup kitchen so that he becomes this kind of man. He becomes the man who loves God. St. Sophronia knew a monk on Athos who said that he hated vigils and he hated going to church. That's all a monk does. But for 20 years, he pretended he liked it. And when the 20 years was over, he was a different man. He loved it. He became different. You see, we have to apply ourselves to the commandments of God so we become something through God's grace, not for our own works alone, but our works testify to our desire. They testify to our love of Christ. Faith gives birth to love. So what are the works? Are they merely testimonies of faith? No, that's what the Protestants say. Works are actually the real fruit of faith. Faith becomes love. Without faith, we have nothing. That's why earlier in the Matins Gospel this morning it said, those who believe and are baptized will be saved. Those who believe not will be damned. Without faith, we cannot be saved. And yet, faith is not sufficient. Because faith may not transform you. That's why James says in his wonderful epistle, the demons believe and they tremble, but they don't change. They don't love God. They don't serve Him. Right? Therefore, men must serve God. They must take their faith and they must apply it. They must turn it into love. Love must come forward from us. This is why Christ speaks so much about His commandments, deeds, actions, works, because this is the fruit of love. And what happens? The man becomes love. You become what you will be for eternity. Now, God is merciful. He sees the labors men take both inside and outside. And the Lord knows when he will save. But those who are saved are men on a trajectory toward God. So we have to be on a trajectory. I don't want to say that heaven is without change. Why? Because the man who's in heaven will change all the time. Because he'll become good forever. That's why I say it's a trajectory. It's like a bullet flying in a direction. Except in paradise, the bullet is aimed at heaven and it flies higher and higher and higher for eternity. Closer and closer and closer towards God's infinite light, but never hits it. Because God is infinite. Hell is the opposite. A gunshot fired into an abyss of darkness. Right? We don't want to go that way. Beloved, the judgment is about who you are. That's why it says in the Troparium, no one can help you. Why? Well, how can you be helped on that day? Because you are what you are. You are what you are. This is what you have become. This is what you have chosen. You have had these thoughts. You have made these thoughts a pattern of your life. You have made these words a patterns of your life. See, what's interesting also is that when you watch Christ talk to the people, they don't know anything. So when he says to the good people, he says, well done. They say, what do you mean? They actually don't understand what Christ is saying. They say, what do you mean, Lord? Why is that? Because they've become so habitually good that they don't think about it. They do these good deeds and it doesn't mean anything to them because this is what they always do. And so it doesn't concern them. And they're surprised when Christ looks at them and says, well done, well done, well done. As for the wicked, they don't understand either. Why is that? Because they're so habitually wicked that they can't really triangulate anymore. They're like, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm not righteous? No, you weren't. You never were. You're very far from it. See, beloved, labor to acquire habits. Seek grace. Seek to follow the commandments so that you may change. Not for a mere reward in a temporal sense, but that you may become what Christ wants you to be. May he grant it to all of us. May he grant us a good answer on his dreadful judgment day. Amen.